13 years ago?
Yeah, it's like, I mean, last update was 2018. Anyways, I'm gonna get into it.
Then I was wrong.
Yes, so GMCollage, that's my project. It's a tool that enables modularization, modules. You might be familiar with that term if you're a programmer, but we'll get into it later. So one day in the life of me as a developer working in the software frequently, I get to work, I make some changes to my code, I compile it, and then I do my entire workout routine, and then I come back to see what I did was wrong or crashes. And then I have to compile again, and then I can make coffee and go for a long walk, and I come back, and it's actually running again, and I realize that I need to make another change. Compile times in Gamemaker Studio are abysmal. They're really bad. So I'm gonna just demo that right now. I've got this little timer open here, and here we've got Gamemaker Studio. So let's press play for this project right now. It's going to crash right away after it's done compiling, but so this is Gamemaker Studio. It does what most game engines do. You can drag in images, you can write code in it, etc., etc. And the project I have open is one that I'm working on collaboratively with 16 people all across the world. We've got some of the content in already, but it's, I'd say about like 30% done at this point. So every day I have to wait a long ass time every time I want to compile the game. It's really a pain in the ass. You can see we're already up to 40 seconds. And it's not even, there's going to be more content added. All right, 40 seconds. So we get a crash. That's great. But all I wanted to show is that the fact that that's actually how long it takes. It's pretty bad.
That's rookie numbers, man. I've ever seen an average C++ project, man.
Well, let's say you deal with this while placing spikes in a level editor, and then you fuck up the level, making it impossible, and you have to move the spikes, and you have to deal with it all over again. It's horrible. So yeah, it breaks creative flow, right? You don't want to have to deal with that. So let's get at what actually happens when you press this green big button. Well, it saves literally all of the resources you have in the project, regardless of whether you've actually changed them or not. Then it's going to do a process on all of your resources. So it's going to create texture pages from many individual textures. It's going to maybe convert some music files, it's going to compile your shaders and code, etc. All this takes more time. And 3, your output from the compiling process is going to be put into a temporary folder, and the game is going to be run from there. If you have 1 gigabyte of music in your project, 1 gigabyte of music is going to get copied to this temp folder every time you compile. So that also takes time. Adds even more time. It's great. And then finally your game will open, you can test, and hopefully shit works. And if it doesn't, you have to go back and compile again. So how long does this take? Well, I've compiled these 2 charts here. On the blue one is the project that we have with around 200 levels in it. We can see the assets, the amount of assets currently, and I'm comparing it to Verve Engine, which is just a Gamemaker Studio 1 asset pack that you can use to make these precision platformers. So the bare minimum will give you around a nice 4-5 seconds compile time every time you want to test your game. What we're dealing with is 50 seconds on a fresh compile, and then half of that on like consecutive compiles. Still a lot. Yeah, so there are a few workarounds to this. So you can deal with the larger compile times by having your collaborators work in separate project files. And then when they're done with their parts, you can take their finished parts and put it into the main project file. This is good because it's quick to compile for them, and then sadly it's hard to reuse assets across these separated project files. So if I make a nice lighting system, which I use in my part, and then someone else wants to use that too in their separate part, we have to copy it over. They can't just pull from GitHub and then they get the changes in a combined project file, right? Workaround 2. You can, instead of letting Gamemaker take care of your files for you, do these processes, which I discussed in step 2 of the compilation process, you can tell Gamemaker, hey, I want to be doing that in real time, So when the game opens, I will do all of those things through code that you would like generally be doing for me. This is pretty easy to do for some things like music. You can just do external music loading and you will skip all of that conversion stuff that it does every time you press the play button. It takes a long time, well, especially on first compile. So that's one way to save time. But we are doing both of those things already. So it's still really slow and is really hard to work with. So what is my workaround that I came up with? Well, as you can see here, we've got a bunch of assets in this project. These folders are named after the different collaborators, and you can see that there's a bunch of like obstacle courses in here. If we go open up one of these levels, my trackpad's broken. You can see, okay, cool, content is there. Objects too, organized in the same way, named after the people. So I'm going to run GMCollage real quick, and we're gonna run this script. Gamemaker's gonna be like, what the hell did you just do to me? I'm gonna freak out real quick. There we go. And now, all of those things are gone. What happens? Well, we just told Gamemaker to act as though those things are not in the project anymore. So if we compile now, it will still compile, even though all of those assets are not there. And I'm gonna, this is tricky, but I'm gonna reset, add 10 minutes to the timer. This should be much faster though. So let's see here. Not 10 minutes, 10 seconds. I said 10 minutes, didn't I? Yeah, so we're about 20, 25 seconds now for compiling. So what is going on? Okay, so 25 seconds is pretty good for a fresh compile. But what's actually going on here? So, yeah, so you can see the comparison. Almost, like it pretty much halves the compile times across the board. What I did is now only the core of the game is there. So if I'm working on the core, say a lighting system, I can tell Gamemaker to pretend as though all of those stages that are there are not actually there, and then I can hit compile and get better compile times and actually work on the lighting system within the main project without having to worry about it. So it's the pros are compile times will no longer increase linearly if you do this setup. So if we add more stages, we can just do the same process and keep working on the core of the game, which is great, without having compile times go up linearly in a straight line. So this project, this gives you the same kind of benefits as having everyone work in separate projects, so in terms of compile times, but it allows you to kind of like put them in and out at will, meaning you can create releases real easy. So there was this massive collaborative project that I was part of where 32 different people were making individual parts, and what they did was they just made sure to test those 32 individual parts pretty thoroughly so that when they would put them all together, they would hopefully not have to fix very much because compile times after that would be definitely like 1.5 minutes plus per change made, which is really bad. Cons are there's some technical overhead to setting this up, and I'll get into this. But first, I'm going to explain to you how Gamemaker resources work, like Gamemaker resource references specifically. So here's what a pretty typical Gamemaker project will look like. You have folders for the different resources. So we got rooms there that are the obstacle courses and stuff like that. We got objects with code, etc. And sprites. Where are sprites? Yeah, there. And then here you've got the little the project file. So you double click that, Gamemaker opens it, and yeah, that's that. So if you inspect those folders and you look into your project, you will see that, yes, this seems to work in a way that for each of these files in the different folders, so let's say the rooms folder, there's a file for a room. That room exists in the resource tree in Gamemaker, and you can open it and edit it. So yeah, there's some correlation there going on. But if I now delete that room, it won't actually disappear from the file explorer. It will disappear from the Gamemaker project, but not from here. What's going on? Well, if you open that project file that I was talking about earlier in like a code editor or a text editor, anything, Notepad, VS Code in this case, you will see that it's actually just something called XML. And you can see the correlation between like the folder structure in the resource tree in GameMaker and this XML. And you can see that the level that I deleted here, now there's a missing line, so it's actually missing from this list over here with the resource paths. So this is how GameMaker actually knows what resources exist in your project, and it's not based on what files are in your file system. This might be different from Godot. I think Godot just kind of uses your file system as that. So what can you do with this knowledge, right? Well, you could, technically, let's say you figure out one day you're done working on this stage, you could just copy out this part of the project file, put it into a text document for later, save it, and GameMaker will freak out, and those rooms will no longer exist, but your game will still compile. Great. And you've just saved a little bit of like a fraction of a second on your compile times. But if you then go into your game and you jump into a portal that tries to take you to that part of the game, then it will crash. So what's going on? Well, GameMaker is saying, this thing that used to exist no longer exists, and now I don't know what to do, so I'm going to crash. So you need to do a little bit of code change for this. Instead of just stating that you're going to go to this level, you're going to have to ask, does this level exist? And if so, give me a number that corresponds to that, and then use the same function you would otherwise to go to that level. So there's a little bit of an extra step in code, but overall it's not too bad, actually. Congratulations, you've saved a fraction of a second from your compile times, right? Now just make sure that when you put that text back into your project file, it's going to be exactly in the same place, and make sure that you don't like put different resources in at different times. That might fuck something up, you know. There's a lot of things you'd have to be perfect on if you were going to do this by hand all the time, and it's also really complicated. So that's why I made GMCollage, which is an application that makes this process easy. Essentially, you just go into a text editor and you write which resources you want to have temporarily removed from your project, and then you feed it to GMCollage on the command line. You say, here's my project file, and here's the file that says which folders you're going to take out, and then it's going to do that process for you and spit out a file with those contents in it for use later. When you're then ready to have the stage back in your project, you can run the same program, but in reverse mode. So that's going to help you save like half your compile time if your project lends itself to this sort of thing, right? And the reason ours does is really because of the structure. We are having a bunch of people use the same asset pack to start making their levels. So our project structure pretty much looks like this. You have the core assets, and then you have a bunch of stages which only refer to the core. So an example of this is, in our obstacle courses, we have a bunch of spikes, right? That is functionality of the core. And all of these stages use these spikes, meaning that if the player touches a spike, it will die, right? So stages or bundles of assets can refer to the core, but not vice versa. So the core cannot refer to the individual like modules, right? If you want to do that, you'd have to do the soft coding thing that I showed you earlier, where you ask GameMaker, is this resource here? And if so, then I will use it, right? So an example of this is, in one of the stages, you have this rising water gimmick, where if you jump into it, it will push you upwards. If we want to use that in the core, we either have to move those assets to the core, making them unable to be taken out again and save compile time, or we will just have to ask whether they exist every time. The other thing is, individual modules cannot refer to each other either, because they might be gone at any point in time too, messing up and crashing. So, in conclusion, with a little bit of technical overhead, you can save a lot of compile time, but you receive a lot of technical overhead in exchange, which is maybe worth it? You'll have to decide for yourself. I assume you're all avid users of Gamemaker Studio 1, so you will intuitively figure this shit out, right? Conclusion number 2, don't use Gamemaker Studio 1. Use the new version, which has good compile times and that actually has good caching so that it doesn't actually just save all of your assets all the time and is really annoying. Yeah. The code's available on my GitHub. There's nothing on my website yet, but check it out in like a few weeks or so. Maybe this talk will be there. And I will be streaming on Twitch every now and then from now on. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
So why use Gamemaker Studio Maker 1?
Isn't that the question, right? Okay, so I wouldn't otherwise, but so all of our community members that are involved in this project, they only know how to use Gamemaker Studio 1. So
Is there that big difference between 1 and 2?
now there is, previously there really wasn't, but there's also a certain refusal to adapt, right? These people are mainly level designers, most of them, right? They know how to make pixel art, they know how to make obstacle courses, but they don't know how to code, and so they don't want to have to be dealing with like lots of changes in their environment, right? And so they couldn't just like copy over some code from another thing, which is a very typical thing to do in the community that I'm from, right? One of the things we could, of course, do is that me being the lead developer of this project, I could then say, okay, the core is going to be in Gamemaker Studio 2, and I'm just going to port everything you make in Gamemaker Studio 1 over to 2. But I don't want to be alone in this, and I also don't want to have to deal with porting everything. So we're going to have to deal with the shitty technical stuff going forward, but at least I'm having fun with it, right?
I just feel like you could have like a documentation or a, I don't know, hey, let's learn this together sort of thing, and then everything would work out as well.
Like how you mean?
Like onboarding to a new engine.
Oh right,
Like,
yeah.
I don't think it's that difficult learning a new engine.
Yeah, well, yeah, you're right.
I like the enthusiasm. Okay, I guess mistake is this. Let me just make it better.
I love Dark Souls programming, and doing shit in Gamemaker Studio 1 is definitely the Dark Souls of programming. If you see it as well, there are always going to be things like suddenly you add a shader which runs perfectly in every other program, but suddenly in Gamemaker Studio you'll add 1 minute of compile time just because of one shader. And then it will run at 1 frames per second all of a sudden where you apply the shader, and you have no idea what's going on unless you consider the fact that it's going to convert your shader to HLSL even though you wrote it in GLSL for the Windows runtime for some reason. It's wonderful. I'd love to do a talk in the future about just all of the weird quirks of Gamemaker language and Gamemaker Studio, how many bugs there are in it. Sometimes you will have a project open, you add files to it, and it just actually adds to a completely different project on your file system. Just wonderful stuff. Yeah, any other questions? Yeah?
I thought about, it might be far-fetched, but I thought about hiring like an assembly guy to actually just change how Gamemaker 1 operates.
So, here's the thing. I know that in part, the bad compile times are due to really bad caching. So if you, for example, change one texture, or you add one texture in GameMaker, it will rebuild all of the texture pages. That's completely unnecessary, and I don't know why it does that. I guess they didn't do it, right? So I thought, hey, I'm gonna be smart about it. I'm gonna decompile the GameMaker compiler, because I know it's written in C#, and then just upgrade it. That in and of itself would of course be a whole lot of trouble, but maybe it will be worth it. Turns out the code is weirdly obfuscated, so I couldn't do that. But I suppose your solution was a bit different, wasn't it? Assembly guard? How do you mean?
Like an assembly guard, like someone who's like the guy who wrote Roller Coaster Tycoon in 99%.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
I don't know.
All right.
It was just like if you could go in and you could no operate the caching thing, just don't cache.
How long would it take to just make the game engine, but again, but better?
Again, but better. Then again, that's worse than going to Gamemaker Studio 2, which would solve the problem. I've seen projects do just actually remake the functionality of Gamemaker Studio, so you could just have a runner for the game, like the Gamemaker, actually older Gamemaker games, but faster. So he just made it all in like I don't know. He made it in C++, and then he replicated the functionality of the bytecode, the Gamemaker Studio bytecode. Almost worked. Ran into a roadblock, like 8,000 lines of code in at some point, and then he gave it up, sadly. And so there's been some attempted solutions. Remaking the engine itself, actually not bad. Like like it's not that horrible. It's just that it's going to be hard to make it work the exact same way, which a lot of people would want. And that's because we've got the people who are really passionate about the exact way in which the precision platformers made in Gamemaker Studio in this way work. So we'd have to not only worry about just remaking the engine, but also making sure that the engine works, like does collisions the exact same way. Which, if you know Gamemaker, you can actually enable pixel perfect collisions on sprites, for example. Though we'd have to remake that. It's like.
What decompile did you use to decompile the Gamemaker compiler?
I used JetBrains' whatever it's called.
The very friendly one. You should use dnspy.
dnspy.
Try that. See if that helps.
I'll try it. But at this point, I'm pretty happy with my results.
dnspy is a library often used for people that want to hack Unity games to add modding support.
Right.
So that often works for people that often has better support for hacking functionality into other libraries, because it's made by people who want to mod Unity games.
Yeah. All right. That's interesting. I didn't know that might actually be better. I thought like, JetBrains, they know what they're doing. It's just gonna work flawlessly.
They have nice code.
They do. They really do.
Experiment with cheat engine, like pointer manipulation and stuff like that.
Ah,
Just
like
try and no operate instead of deobfuscating and then decompiling and recompiling.
I have not. I have very little experience in that field, so I don't know. That solution didn't come to me.
Maybe there's some nerds on old forum called Unknown Cheats.
Right.
Which is like a very old school hacker forum that is still active.
Yeah.
There's a lot of weird people that might be interested actually trying to solve that problem, because they're not interested in like, there's a lot of people who's not interested in making hacks necessarily, but they're just interested in like fucking with programs.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I see the appeal in that, because I've had a lot of fun making this thing. And also, just to make you proud, I use C. Guess what? I use C. I'm a C programmer, baby.
On C.
Hell yeah. No, that's gonna be in every of my job applications for sure. All right.
All right.